Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary McCarty Arias. I'm glad to be back with you for our webinar. I'm also here with Clyde Frederick, who works here at NDRI, and he makes sure that everything works smoothly. So we're glad that you're here, and I know that the Dallas Cowboys are playing as we speak, or I think we're all both starting at the same time, and yet I think luckily for some of the preseason games, I think it's only the second and third string people. So I am glad that you're here, and welcome back. As I said, this course is going to be on supported employment. We'll be here for the hour, and I hope you like our picture. We were thinking of the examples of how you really help people. You help people grow, you feed them water, and let's see another picture. One of the things too about employment also is you also help to provide people with an opportunity. So here we go. That's still me, and I am a vocational rehabilitation counselor by trade. So if John Burton wants to ask, why are you doing this course? John, I hope you're still on from the other night. I am a vocational rehabilitation counselor by trade, and when I first started working in the field, I was working in substance abuse treatment and with people with co-occurring disorders. And what I did was to either help people go back to the jobs that they had or help people find new jobs. I also taught at NYU in the rehabilitation counselor department for many years. So again, glad to be here. So one of the things we'll start out with is kind of a working definition of what is supported employment, and we'll talk about evidence-based and what that means. And here's what we know. It is a well-defined approach to helping people with disabilities participate in the competitive labor market by helping them find meaningful jobs, and that's key, and we'll talk about that and the importance of that in an ideal world people will do what they want to do, and that goes for you all too, that if you're in a job that you like, it makes your life a lot easier, you want to get up, you want to go to work, and so hopefully we'll do the same thing with our clients. It really takes a lot of ongoing support from a team of professionals. And so, for example, those of you who are care managers or working with people, if you work with some of the vocational rehabilitation counselors from other agencies, it's helpful to really work as a team because, for example, some of you might know how to help people with interviews, and other of you can help people with some of the side effects of the medications. I also think, and one of the cool things about having some of the safety people is that you really see people a lot, and then they see you as really a role model in kinds of jobs that they might want to get. Another thing that supported employment does is sometimes some of the programs called or provide job coaches. And I'm not sure if people have heard of that before, if you've used it, but what it often involves is the care managers become job coaches, and a lot of companies like when the job coach goes to the job with the consumer. Now, what are the challenges of that? I know sometimes people who were in recovery from substance use really didn't want a job coach at the site, but the companies really liked having job coaches because the job coaches provided some kind of training, they provided some kind of support, and also if the person didn't show up, the job coach had to do the job. One of my good friends was in social work school, and she was a job coach at a place called Fountain House, which is a place for people with severe mental illnesses. And she was coaching somebody who worked in a cafeteria at one of those Wall Street firms. So one day he calls in sick, and she has to go and do his job. And she said it was really illuminating because as she was cleaning the tables, people were looking at her, and they were looking down at her, and she said it was really helpful for her to kind of get in touch with what people might have been feeling. So that's the working definition of supported employment. Before we look more at the principles, I'm going to ask you all a question. So here's a question, and I'm going to ask you to write this in. What are the reasons that you work? What are the reasons that you work? So if you let Sarah know and she can type them in, let's see all the reasons that you work. To pay the bills. Yes, that's one of the big ones, right? What else? And you like working with the homeless community, and again, being able to provide community service, to be able to help, that can be worthwhile for people as well. To get the benefits, so not only is it getting the paycheck, but getting the medical insurance or the vacation days or the sick days. And that's part of one of the reasons why people work. What other reasons might have? Personal gratification, and that's a wonderful, ability to do what you like and to feel good about it. Good. Others? I've got a list of about 15 here, but I'd like to really hear what you're saying. I think that our list will also probably coincide. Would you like me to read what's on my list? Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, one of the first things I wrote was money. People work because they need to pay the rent or their mortgages, they need to buy food, they need to get benefits. But there's also some other reasons, and actually I'm going to go to the next slide, because work really provides a biopsychosocial, and you could even put in spiritual approach to health and probably to wellness. So the biological are things like the ability to pay your rent, to buy food, to get your benefits. There's a lot of psychological benefits to work too. So for example, you had said things like personal gratification or like working with the homeless community. I mean, that's part of one of the benefits that people get in the helping profession. Another thing that people get is it increases self-esteem. It also gives you an identity. Sometimes you go to a place and people ask you your name, and then they ask you what you do for a living, and then based on what you tell them, they either keep talking to you or sometimes they walk away. One of my clients was telling me a story about how he really liked having a job, because when he went to a house party and people asked him, did he have a job, what did he do, he could tell them and they kept talking to him. So it does give you an identity. For many of us, it gives us a sense of purpose. And there's also a lot of social reasons to work. So for example, it provides structure. It gives you social status, it gives you socialization. So a lot of times people who don't have anything to do, I think there's a saying that says doing nothing isn't good if you have nothing to do. But when you get out to work, and especially I know at your site, you see lots of people, you see your colleagues, you see a lot of the consumers, or the guests, I know as you all call them, and it just gives you an opportunity to socialize. What's not up there, actually it is, when you look at social/spiritual, the term vocation means calling. So sometimes people in the helping profession look at their vocation as a calling. Many of the people I've worked with who've been in recovery from substance use and mental illness want to give back, and so that's why they do what they do. So there's a lot of reasons why people work. There's even some research, by the way, that says when people win the lottery, guess what? They usually go back to work. Now, I know sometimes we say things like, oh, if I only won lotto, I wouldn't go to work, but many people do. So work meets a lot of our, gives us a lot of benefits, and one of the reasons I started to look at this is our clients are really no different. So it would give them some of the benefits from a biopsychosocial and spiritual place. Also, I know in the next training when we talk about housing, it fits into Maslow's hierarchy. So if you look at basic human needs, food, water, and shelter, work helps that. The next one is security, work helps that. The next thing is love or relationships, work can help that. So our clients or our consumers or our guests, and I know I'm using a bunch of different terms, want to work for the same reasons that we do. So evidence-based practice. I know that as part of your program you have started to have trainings and have incorporated some evidence-based practices. And basically what that is a fancy term for looking at some of the interventions that we do and applying the best available research results. So we really want to look at, does what we do work? And what do we need to do to make it work? So that's one of the buzzwords. And for example, when you had the training with Paul on motivational interviewing, that is an evidence-based practice. Supported employment is an evidence-based practice for people with severe mental illness. I will say, by the way, that whenever I look at the evidence, I want to know, like, who was the intervention done with? Was it done with people who look like people who I work with? And so I think that's an important piece. We do know that supported employment actually has worked for many people of various backgrounds, of different ages, of different races and ethnicities. There also, by the way, is something called work as a priority, and what they did was, since the research a lot of the research wasn't done with supported employment with people who are homeless. It was done a lot at mental health community centers, but they're looking into that in a more, they're just looking into it more. So, what are some of the principles? And one of the things about evidence-based practices is they'll always have principles, they'll have pieces that you have to do. So we'll go over some of the principles. And the information of where I got this, by the way, you can download, and I put it on one of the slides in the back so that if you want to download the entire pamphlet on supported employment, you can. So you could see, for example, that the first one is eligibility is based on consumer choice. And really what that means is, we talk a lot about client-centered, is that a client or a consumer can choose to work or can choose to tell you that they want to work. Supported employment services are integrated with comprehensive mental health treatment. So what that means is everybody's working together, and sometimes if you're at case conferences, you can talk about the client and figure out, you know, what's the best way to serve them. So I think I was using the example before is, you may be, as the care manager, getting the person into work, but they also might be working with some of the other health people who can tell you something about their medication side effects. Like, for example, one of the side effects of some of the medications for schizophrenia makes people have a really dry mouth. Now, that doesn't sound like such a big deal, but for some people, if they have jobs where they have to talk, and they have to talk pretty regularly, they can figure out ways to work with that. Sometimes it's something very simple like having lifesavers, or there was even a court case where somebody brought that to court. They were a cashier, and what happened was the cashier who had a mental illness wanted to be able to have water at the cash register, and she brought the case to court, and so they said all the cashiers should have access to water. So that supported employment, so everybody's working together to find out where people are. The goal is competitive employment, and what they mean by that is, and it can be part-time, it can be full-time. We'll talk also about the whole piece around benefits, which is a real, I think, a challenge for many people. But it speaks to people getting competitive wages or minimum wage. That's not necessarily competitive, as you know. But it also incorporates people or integrates people working with other people in the community, so that the goal really is competitive employment. Here's some more principles, and this is key. Benefits counseling is important, and people are really nervous, by the way, about losing their benefits, and so when you have access to people in some of the agencies that you work with, and I'll go over some of them, like people at Social Security or the vocational rehabilitation people, they can really help people figure that out. The job search begins soon after a consumer expresses an interest in work. One of the things they find, by the way, is if some people are in job readiness groups, and these job readiness groups last for about 2 years or longer or less, they don't work. So if a client says to you, you know, I'm really ready to work, or I want to work, it really can start the process. That doesn't mean you're going to go out and get a job tomorrow, because we'll talk about assessment, but we want to let people work. Follow-up supports are necessary, and again, I think that's an important piece. Sometimes it's even something like having them interview people who work, which could be all of you, like at your site. And then systematic job development is important. And one of the things about job development that's important, and I know I have a slide on it, is that when businesses work with agencies, especially when they know there's already a disability like mental illness or substance abuse or any other kind of disability, that the job development relationships are really important. I'll talk a little bit more about that. What does the research say? Research has shown that consumers who spend extended time in job readiness groups rarely result in employment. And I know that, you know, we go through changes or patterns where we say, okay, everybody should be in a job readiness group for a really long time, and they find out that doesn't work. So now we're looking at things a lot differently. So it comes from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and again, that whole pamphlet will be sourced in the back of your book, in the back of your slides. So, personal benefits counseling. We know that teamwork is really important, and again, I think it's also helpful to find friends at the Social Security office, at all the different offices, and I know you have some of them on site during the day, because SSI and SSDI will be affected by work. Just in case you didn't know some of the tidbits, SSI stands for Supplementary Security Income, and that is used by people who have reached a certain age. Usually you have to be 62 if you don't have a disability, or for other people with disabilities. And some people are on SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance, and that's usually for people who have had some work history and they are on disability. So the key difference, by the way, is SSI, maybe no work history. SSDI will have a work history. I was just thinking of somebody I know, by the way, who went on disability, and she used to work for a very large company, so her SSDI payments were quite large, which really was not an incentive to go back to work. But if you look at some of the SSI payments that people make, there probably is some incentive to work. But people really need to know what that means, because again, the personal benefits counseling is tricky. Another thing that's really important too is to have some follow along supports. People may need a lot of time, and they may need a lot of support. One of the things that sometimes happens is people get a job and then they relapse, and it could relapse in terms of their substance abuse or their mental health. What we do know, by the way, is though when somebody's working and they relapse, they tend to have shorter periods of relapse, and they do get back to work. But again, it's like having a coach or somebody, or a mentor. And some of us, for example, have had mentors. Sometimes we need to teach our clients how to develop mentors, or you are mentoring them. So the follow-along supports really are important. Now, job development, as I was saying before, I would spend some time talking about it, because one of the things that happens is the research shows that job development programs have better outcomes. Now, what does that mean in plain English? Sometimes what happens is a company will work closely with one of the agencies, and the people from the agency will go to work in that company. Now, what are the advantages of that? Usually the company already knows about the people's background, so they may know that people have mental illness or they have substance use or co-occurring disorders, and so it kind of avoids some of those questions that really preclude people from working at other places. I mean, sometimes, and I know actually, Sarah, you're the HR person, but in a lot of companies, by the way, the HR people, sometimes their job is to get rid of people or to really just go with people who are really qualified, and that's where a job development program can work. It provides a link with businesses, and businesses like to be connected with agencies. Not only does it help their reputation, but companies may want to partner with you because it enhances, as I said, their reputation, but it also provides tax incentives. I remember working with an agency, and they had somebody from the Marriott Corporation come to talk to them, and the HR people were required to hire people with disabilities because they knew they could get tax credits. Now, they might be doing it for money, but we do it because we want people to get jobs. So job development and working closely with businesses can be really helpful. Another thing that people often do is they set up business advisory councils, and you may not have to do that, but some of the one-stops or some of the other agencies that you work with, they may do that. And one of the reasons it's helpful is they might meet once a month. A client can come and talk to them, they can show them their resume, and they can get feedback, and it's really a win-win situation because the people in the companies often get some, I'm going back to what your list said about personal gratification, and they might like working with people who are homeless or they believe in service, and so that is something that they may want to do as well. So collaborations and really working together, we know that that can be really helpful. I'll throw out a question to you is, where do most people get their jobs? Where do most people, or how do most people get their jobs? It's for anybody. What do you think? Okay, you knew the answer. Got it. Okay. From friends and online. I'm going to stick with the first one, and that people get most of their jobs from their friends and from family members. So one of the things that we can do really is work with other people, help them develop other kind of networks so that they can be helpful. So for example, I have in my notes here, and it's not on the slide, but I used to encourage people to go to AA or NA meetings, or Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous meetings near where they wanted to work. Now, a friend of mine said, but they're not job placement people. And I was telling him the example about, I used to go to an Al-Anon meeting down near Wall Street, and across from the Al-Anon meeting was an AA meeting. And maybe because I was a little nosy, I wanted to see who was walking in there. And there were about 80 people in that meeting, and many people were wearing suits. So I assumed that some of those people could help people get jobs. So it's really kind of putting out the word. Online is obviously also another way that people are getting jobs as well. You know, and again, the challenge is to get your resume online, to write it appropriately. And I was watching television this morning, and Susie Welch was on. She's married actually to somebody who used to work for a large corporation, and she was saying if you're looking for work, make sure that you do have an online presence. The challenge with the online presence, by the way, is she was suggesting LinkedIn, but she was also encouraging people to be careful about pictures they put on Facebook, because if you apply for a job, the people who are interviewing you can go online, they can Google you, and then they can find out any kind of picture that you took in your bathing suit when you were drinking or partying on vacation. So, but to go back to this is really helping people figure out who their friends and family are and working with them, working with some of the mental health providers that you do work with. Some of them I think are at your site, and some of them will be in other places. There's the friends and family. Workforce development organizations, and I know there are a number of them in Dallas, and they're ones that you work with, and they can be really helpful on a variety of for a variety of reasons. Another one too is there's an agency, the state agency in Dallas, and actually they're all over the country, and it's the vocational rehabilitation agencies. They're also good people to know. They work with people with all disabilities, but one of the things that they can do is they can do assessment, they can help with reasonable accommodations, and we'll talk about what that means, and they can work with job placement pretty easily, and they know a lot about a lot of different disabilities. So we've been talking, at least in some of these trainings, about substance abuse or mental health, but some of your clients may have traumatic brain injury, they may have diabetes that prevents them from working. There could be a whole variety of things. Some of the other ones are those one-stops, and some of those are community organizations. The one-stops are, again, set up to help people with work, and probably one of the good things about them is they are one-stops. So there's a variety of places that you can use, and it's good to have friends in those agencies. Another one too, if you want another free book, you can download the Social Security 2014 Red Book. I was just reading it before, and it starts to explain everything you needed to know about Social Security. I'm going to say it's a little bit tricky, but it tells you all about the amounts that you get, things about when you can work, when you can't work, who can work, what are some of the grace periods that you have, and that can be really helpful. So what you can do to support someone who wants to look for a job. You can encourage them. You can build a relationship with them. And I know most of you have that, but sometimes if you look at people from what they might want to do, you can help them with that. And again, this may not be all of your job's experience or requirements, but to take a limited time for job readiness activities. So, how do we engage the consumer? So the reason I picked Tony Romo, by the way, obviously because you're in Dallas, but there is the last bullet says to help him or her understand how you can support their goals. So I don't know if he is throwing a touchdown pass, but I thought I would put him up there. But here's what you could do again: build and continue the relationships. Another thing you could do is learn what interests them. You know, you can ask people, what do you like to do? I mean, you could do this for yourselves as well. Sometimes though, sometimes people have hobbies. Sometimes they used to have hobbies before they became homeless. Maybe they had jobs before they became homeless, and you can find out really what they like to do. The big challenge, by the way, is people can be interested in something but not necessarily be good at that. For example, I'm interested in singing, but I'm really bad at it. So if you were my vocational counselor, you probably wouldn't encourage me to do that. So anyway, let's go from Tony Romo to assessment. And here's what we'll do. We'll look at some of the assessment pieces, and then we'll do a case study. So even though supported employment says, you know, let's get people working pretty quickly, you still want to do assessment because it's always key. Now, one thing that's not up there, by the way, is helping people figure out what's important to them. So I don't know if you've ever done work in values clarification, but one of the advantages of working with values clarification is to help people figure out what's important to them. Why is that important? If you look at what you value and then you look at what you do for a living, then hopefully it coincides. So if I look back at what you said about working with the community, the homeless community, or personal gratification. Probably some of you, actually, let me ask a question. Why do some of you like what you do? Why do some of you like what you do or do what you do? What's important to you that made you choose to work at the bridge? Again, helping end homelessness. Any others? Although that's a gigantic one. And here's the good thing is, if that's what you believe in, then you're in the right place. I often say that if you really, or for lots of us who work in the nonprofit world, if we valued money, we'd probably be working for Donald Trump. Now, that might be funny these days, talking about Donald Trump, but I used to use that as an example that if you really valued money, you'd be in a law firm or you'd be working in investment banking. And it doesn't mean that we can't make money, but it's really helpful to look at what you do and to have it coincide with what's important to you. And what happens too for some of our clients is they may have forgotten what their values are. Or for example, in substance abuse treatment, somebody might value honesty, but maybe because they were in recovery or maybe they were using, they had to steal or they had to lie to maintain their habit. So sometimes it's good for them to start to look back at what was really important. So assessment, as I said, is always key, and you want to really look, as I said, at what are people's interests, what are their strengths, and you know that many of your clients bring many strengths, and some of them are survival skills, but those are definitely strengths. You also want to look at work history. Some people have had extensive work histories. Some people have not. And then when you look at that, you can get an idea of what people like to do, what people might be qualified to do. And then finally, two other things are some of the unique challenges. Many of our clients have had gaps in their employment records. They have criminal records, and one thing I do know about criminal records is that you have to really look at the criminal record because some of the jobs that people might want, they may not qualify for based on what they've done. I once had an internship at Citibank, and they said, you know, if you ever wrote bad checks or you robbed a bank, you weren't going to be able to work there. That kind of makes sense, right? They did say, though, if you murdered somebody, that would be okay. So you want to look at a whole variety of things in terms of assessment. So ready for a case study? So I'll read it, you can see it, and I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Or I'll tell you actually what the questions are before. You know, as we meet this person, Thomas, we met at the webinar on co-occurring, we'll start to ask you to start thinking about what are his interests, what are his strengths. So, hi, I'm Thomas. I met you recently on the last webinar, or the webinar before the last one. You helped choose my red flags, and I have been using the mental health services here at the bridge. I want to work. I used to work as a mechanic, and I'm good at fixing things. I'm worried about getting a job and being on medication. I don't know if I need a refresher course on fixing cars. Remember, I was in Iraq, and the Army used my skills. I thought this country wanted to hire veterans, but people look at my hair and beard strangely. I did get fired from a couple of jobs, but the last one was the boss's fault. The guys at my site here also told me to be careful about going to work because it might change my benefits. As I told you last time, I'm not going to the VA. I want to work again so I can feel, quote, normal. When can I start looking for a job? If I go for a job interview, can they ask me about my medications? So I'm going to ask you to take a look at that, and I have the questions on the next slide, but I won't change it. So what do you think Thomas is interested in? What do you think Thomas is interested in? Right, being a mechanic, working on cars, and actually that's really a good strength. And as some of you know, if you have a car, mechanics do quite well. So yes, he is interested in working in cars. What do you think his strengths are? What do you think his strengths are? Fixing things, definitely. In fact, something, there's something called a situational assessment, and some places will have people fix things at the site, and then they can get an idea of how the people can work at things. You have to be really careful though, because ethically, you don't want, for example, people fixing your car when you should have brought it to the mechanic. But sometimes you can find out some of that from some of the observation. So he can fix things, and that is a good thing. What do you know about his work history? What do you know about his work history? Right, he can't keep a job, so he's had a couple of jobs, and that certainly becomes problematic. But we can talk about, or some of the job development people are good at helping people deal with gaps in employment. Sometimes, right, his challenges, and that might have been one of the other questions of getting fired. And sometimes, he said it was the boss's fault. Maybe it was, we don't know. But when you go for an interview, you can't say, oh yeah, the reason I got fired was because of my boss. So you have to really figure out for people, how do you answer those questions and still get the job. So that's definitely one of the challenges. Other challenges that you could see there, so he can't keep a job, or he's had a couple of jobs he got fired from. He's on medications, and that, yeah, appearance is gigantic, as you know. And I was reading, I thought you guys had a barber, somebody who can provide free haircuts, and so sometimes that's really important for getting a job, is that, if your appearance isn't up to par, it's going to be hard to get a job. I worked for an agency in Baltimore doing some technical assistance, and they sent out most of the women they were in recovery from substance use. They all had children. They were on public assistance. They sent out the women for jobs, and none of them got the jobs. Then they did one intervention, and guess what it was? It was having them fix their teeth. So they had their teeth fixed. Guess what? They all got the jobs. So one of the reasons, I put that in there, I had met this vet in Binghamton when I was training in upstate New York, and he didn't like to cut his hair, and he didn't like to clean his beard, and was kind of straggly, and he was always surprised. He wasn't surprised, but he knew people reacted to him very strangely. So some of those things would have to be worked on. The whole thing about the job interview, by the way, is they cannot ask you about any medications. They can ask you if you have a disability that would prevent you from doing the job, but it's a yes-no question, so they cannot ask you about medications. So those are just some pieces. Obviously, there's some things that Thomas brings some strengths, and he also brings some challenges. So kind of went over those questions already, but here's a couple of things to kind of look at. The American for Disabilities Act, as some of you know, actually it celebrated its 25th anniversary this year, makes it illegal for a private employer or a state or local government employer to discriminate on the basis of disability. So if somebody walks into an interview and they're in a wheelchair, they can't say, oh, by the way, I'm not going to hire them because they're in a wheelchair, or any kind of disability. It's also illegal to retaliate against a person because the person complained about discrimination. And it includes mental illness, substance use disorders, and other disabilities. I think one of the big challenges is in a poor economy, when maybe 100 people apply for a job, they may not, the people who are hiring may not know that somebody has a mental illness, or they may not know anything about substance use disorders, but if they have kind of an inkling, they may try to get rid of people and just say, well, we had like 100 people. But the ADA has been really helpful in preventing discrimination for people with disabilities. Now, one of the things about reasonable accommodations, and that's a term that is often used, and I'm going to guess, Sarah, you know about this as an HR person, and some of you are familiar with this as well, is that it's any modification or adjustment to a job or work environment that enables a qualified person with a disability to apply for or perform a job. So the person has to be qualified to do the job, and it also has to be reasonable. Here's some examples. So it may be tangible. Sometimes it's a certain type of chair. Sometimes, for example, if somebody is hard of hearing, they get a certain piece in their phone. It can be non-tangible, like a modified work schedule for a person requiring regular appointments with a healthcare provider. I just did some trainings recently for the rehabilitation agency in New York City because they had a challenge, or I think they were sued for, there was a case about people with HIV, and one of the reasonable accommodations that people were sometimes asking for was the ability to take medications. The good thing about HIV, by the way, is that the medications and the regimen has gotten a lot better or a lot easier, but that would be an example. So the key is that if you're going to ask for a reasonable accommodation, you do have to go through the HR department, and then the people in human resources might ask you, actually they would ask you to get some medical papers, but they don't necessarily have to. In fact, they're strongly discouraged from telling a person's supervisor what the disability is. Now, are there exceptions? Yeah. Sometimes, like I was asking my HR person, and she was saying that if a person had a disability where they'd be getting seizures, they would want the supervisor to know that. But bottom line is that people really don't have to tell their supervisors about their disability. Now, disclosure, and I actually just said this, but if a person needs a reasonable accommodation, they will disclose this information to the Human Resource Department. And again, just to repeat, they don't disclose the disability, but they'll tell the supervisor that the person needs special accommodations, like going for medical appointments or a variety of things. I do have a question for you on this one, because a client can make a decision about whether to disclose to coworkers if they choose. So here's a question. What would be the advantage of a client telling their coworkers about their disability, whether it's mental illness or substance use? What would be the advantages? Can't see what people are thinking or kind of the process that you're dealing with, but to know what would happen in case they have an emergency. Yeah, and that actually is one of the big reasons of why people might tell their coworkers what their disability is, and what would be the advantage. And that definitely would be an advantage to do it. Can you think of any others? Yeah, and bottom line is you want to create safety for your client, and actually companies want to create safety for their workers. Another thing too, and you can buy this or not buy this, but sometimes when people meet people who have a disability and they learn more about it, it may make them less judgmental about it. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because it could really have the opposite effect. And I will ask a question is, what do you think are the disadvantages of telling people your disability? What do you think are some of the disadvantages of telling people your disability? I'm talking about coworkers, not necessarily supervisors. Yeah, they would be treated differently. People are judgmental. So you never know how people are going to react. Another thing, I used to encourage people to be careful about disclosing, because once you disclose, You can't take it back. And for example, if somebody has a co-occurring disorder and there's substance use involved, even if the person's in recovery, sometimes if you go around talking about it a lot, and let's say you work at a corporation, and then all of a sudden somebody's pocketbook is missing, guess what? That person is going to be blamed, or that's the first person that they're going to talk to. So I think it's kind of important. It's interesting because in treatment, in drug treatment, we always used to encourage people to be open and honest about everything, and then sometimes people go to jobs and they tell people like too much information, that TMI. So people can make their decisions, and sometimes some of the vocational rehab counselors work with people around that, or you can help them without that as well. Let me say too that during a job interview, you cannot be asked any of those like personal questions, like I was saying about medication. You can't ask people like why are you in a wheelchair. You can only ask for reasonable accommodations after the person has a job offer. You're not also supposed to be drug tested when you go for a job interview. You could be drug tested after you're offered a job. So those are some of the things to keep in mind, especially around disclosure. So I may be asking you all another question about some of the creative ideas for employment. So here's some ideas that I have. You may have other ones. So the first one is really to have consumers shadow employees at the bridge. Sometimes if somebody says, you know, I want to be one of the safety officers, and they shadow or kind of hang out with the person for either a day or a certain amount of time, it'll start to give them an idea about what it's like. Sometimes some counselors I know have had people shadow them, and then sometimes the client said, gee, I didn't realize you had to do all that paperwork. I thought you just went around talking to people and helping people. So they get to kind of really see what the whole kind of the real deal is. So that's sometimes things people will do. Another project sometimes people do is go out into the community and interview people who have jobs, or interview their family and friends who have jobs, and they can start to kind of look at, you know, what they might want to do. Another thing is, and I know you have a board members, is, and I was looking them up and looking at maybe the companies that they work with, but you can ask some of the board members, you could say I said this by the way, about employment in their companies, or what are some of the opportunities that you might have for collaboration. Also, you can also look at, I'm sure that the bridge uses many different kinds of organizations around food, around cleaning. You can look at some of the companies that you do work with and see what kind of collaborations can be done to connect people to employment. So those are some ideas that I thought about. Do you think of it, actually, do you think you could do any of those, or what are some things that either you've done or you might want to do to create some new ideas for employment? Okay. Oh, okay. Got it. So you have some policies about asking board members about these types of questions. Okay. Just like I said, just threw that out as an idea. If it doesn't work, I apologize. We'll have to think of some other ideas with that. Can you think of any things that you can do? I was reading, for example, that there was a printing office that was near the bridge, and they like working with people who are guests at the bridge. So can you think of other places in the neighborhood that might be helpful? You know, I was thinking too about organizations or corporations that we usually intern for case management intake at the bridge. Great. Oh, because of safety practices, we're not able to have anyone shadow a safety officer. That makes a lot of sense. And again, you have to figure out the safety practices at your site. So I don't want to create any hassles in terms of safety. So maybe those ideas won't be as good. Maybe we'll have to think of some others. All right, so I'll just start to kind of move right along. This was the source that I was telling you about. It's from Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and it's called, you can download it, Supported Employment, Building Your Program, and there's all that information that you need to have, and it came out in 2009, although supported employment really has been working for actually many, many years with people with severe mental illness. So before I have you fill out the evaluations, let me throw out, we've got a few minutes for questions. What questions can I answer about supported employment or anything around employment and disabilities? What questions might you have? So we still have some time. What are some questions that I can answer before Clyde and I leave about supported employment? Oh, no questions. So questions, comments, loose ends. I still have no questions. Is Dallas going to win tonight? The Cowboys going to win? Yes, good. I know the Texas Rangers already won their baseball game this afternoon. So again, I thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful, and we'll be back, I think, a week from Monday to talk about supportive housing. So thank you very much. I'm also thank Clyde, who's down the hall, who made sure that this show went on.